Dr. Isaacs, thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to spend time with you and your audience tonight.
Thank you. So for anyone and everyone who may not be familiar with Dr. Isaacs, Dr. Isaacs, I got to meet at the Truth About Cancer conference a couple of years ago. We were in the Healing Strong suite, and I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Isaacs. I had heard about her before, read about some of her work, and I was just very excited to meet her. Dr. Isaacs is a graduate of Vanderbilt University School of Medicine and is certified by the American Board of Internal Medicine. She offers individualized nutritional protocols for patients with cancer and other illnesses, as well as protocols for health maintenance. She and her colleague, the late Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, worked together for more than 20 years, and they published articles together with their results. And so Dr. Isaacs' website is drlindai.com, drlindai.com, if you want more information or to read some of her articles. And so Dr. Isaacs, thank you again for being here for our Q&A session. And we are going to open it up now for questions. And if you're not asking a question, I ask that you keep your mic muted so that we can have no background noises. So if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Stephanie, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, hello. My question was in relation to the Gonzalez protocol with in relation to melanoma, as treating it as though it was ash with the sympathetic dominance, and comparing that to the Gerson therapy, which is more of an alkalizing diet. And I just wanted to understand the rationale behind that.
All right. Well, I'd like to just give a very brief overview of what's involved with my treatment, because the question you asked requires a little extra explanation, and I don't want to go into it too much, partly because those who did watch the interview might get bored with me repeating myself, but at the same time, I gather there's some new folks here as well. So the treatment that I offer involves three different aspects. One is nutritional supplements, and that includes a lot of pancreatic enzymes. One is diet, which can vary from person to person, as you were just alluding to, so that there's some patients that I would feel would need a more vegetarian type of diet, and others that I would actually put on things like red meat. And then there's detoxification, coffee enemas, which I would imagine many of you in this group have already heard about. So in terms of which patients do well on which diet, first of all, I'll say that with any treatment like this, bear in mind that it's not as if the Orthodox medical world has done huge studies on this particular topic. They haven't. It's barely getting into their concepts that it matters what you eat. Although with the new immunotherapies, they're actually discovering that gut health matters as to whether the treatment will work or not. So one of these days, the oncologist may remove the candy from the waiting room. But having said that, the work that Dr. Gonzalez and I did was actually based on the clinical experience of our predecessor, William Donald Kelly. And what he found in the course of 20 years of treating cancer patients was that there were some people that just did better if they ate a lot of red meat, a more acid-forming diet. And the reasoning behind that ties into what's called the autonomic nervous system, the system that controls functions of our body that we don't have to consciously think about, like our heartbeat or our blood pressure. The sympathetic system is, when it's overactive, it's the fight or flight system. So when it's overactive, our blood pressure goes up, our heart rate goes faster, and people with an overactive sympathetic system in the Kelly model are more likely to develop the solid tumors like breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer, all the ones that are called carcinomas. But there was another group of patients that he felt, based on his own observations and other practitioners before him, that had an overactive parasympathetic system. That's the rest and digest system, and it stimulates the immune system as well. So that's where the idea being that a meat diet tones down the overactive parasympathetic system, and it also tones down that group of cancers like lymphoma or leukemias. Now, your question was about melanoma. Where does that fit in? On a purely practical level, what Dr. Kelly found and what we found is that those patients tend to do well with meat in the diet. But the question would be, well, then where does the Gerson results with melanoma fit into that? And part of the answer there potentially is that a very low protein diet, like your typical Gerson diet, what that potentially does is free up the body's own pancreatic enzymes to go look for cancer cells. Mm-hmm. We believe that, and again, I can do a 15-minute riff on this particular topic, but we believe that pancreatic enzymes play a role in the management of cancer or the prevention of cancer. And but they also play a role in the digestion of animal protein. So when you eat a very low protein diet, what happens is that those enzymes are freed up to go look for cancer cells. The trouble is that when a person whose metabolism needs red meat goes on a vegetarian diet, they tend to develop other types of problems like allergies or trouble concentrating. There's quite a long list, actually. So what we do instead is provide the animal protein in the diet, but also provide a lot of pancreatic enzymes to help digest it and to look for cancer cells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's a rather long answer to a short question, but unfortunately that one was a complicated one.
Yes, thank you. That does make a bit of sense.
That's great. Thank you. I have some questions here from others. So I'll start asking those while people are getting their, unless, while everyone's getting their questions ready. So I have a few questions from Mitch. And the first he asked is, well, I can anticipate your answer, but his question was, which brand of pancreatic enzymes should a person use if they want to use a protocol like yours?
All right, well, the closest thing that's commercially available to the enzymes that I recommend for patients is from a company called Allergy Research Group or Nutricology. It's actually the same company, but they put different labels on the bottles depending on whether it's being sold through the health food store or through practitioners. But those are the closest to what I use in my own practice. So that's the answer to that one.
Okay, thank you. And so he was wondering also about accessing those enzymes, but I imagine that he was wondering about accessing the brand that you use.
Yeah, they're in relatively short supply, and so I reserve them for my patients specifically. So that's the reasoning why. The company that sells our products actually wants to only sell to our patients for various reasons. So that information I don't have for you.
Okay, thank you. And he's wondering how to determine the amount of enzymes to take daily. Is it by weight?
The trouble with that question is that it gets too close to me telling people how to treat themselves. And, I certainly understand why it is that you're asking the question, but I might as well just package up my medical license and ship it to the state medical board if I start answering that kind of question, because they definitely frown on that. In fact, our predecessor in this work, Dr. Kelly, wrote a little book called One Answer to Cancer, which was basically a self-treatment book. And that got him into all kinds of trouble, including losing his dental license and having to flee Texas to go move to another state altogether. So I can tell you that that's not a wise thing for a practitioner to do, is to answer very specific questions.
And interestingly enough, that's where you ended up in Texas.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, that is kind of funny. I actually thought about Dallas for a little while, partly because that's where Dr. Kelly was. Grapevine, Texas is where
Oh.
he was an orthodontist, and then he himself developed cancer and then treated himself, and hence the methodology that I now use. We came and looked at Austin and decided we liked it. Like the landscape is a lot more pleasant. It's nice and hilly, and just reminded me actually of Kentucky, which is where I went to high school and college.
Oh, that's so cool. Very cool.
Yeah, the only thing about Kentucky is it gets really cold in the wintertime. So I've decided I've had enough. I'm in Austin.
Did you have to shovel the snow around you in New York?
No, not in New York, because I lived in apartments, so it was somebody else's problem. But I certainly had to trudge through it, so to speak, to
Oh,
get to
yeah.
a way or bus or whatever.
Yeah. And then it gets really dirty with the
That
street
too.
dirt and all of that.
Yeah, the snow in New York City is beautiful for about 30 minutes, and then it's gray.
Yeah. Well, certainly hoping and praying that things continue to go well for you in Texas, in
Oh,
Austin.
thank you.
You're welcome. Mitch also asked if there are any potential reactions to the enzymes.
Well, we do find that patients, as they take the pancreatic enzymes, can get flu-like symptoms over the course of days to weeks. So it really depends on the patient. What we believe is happening is that the enzymes can actually, in the process of working on abnormal types of cells and promoting repair, create waste materials, and those waste materials can make people feel like they've got the flu. So that's where the coffee enemas come in as a method of getting rid of those waste materials. Other than that, though, the enzymes typically are pretty well tolerated. I mean, of course, there are going to be people that have just don't swallow capsules well, for example, or a few people that they might irritate the stomach, but most of the patients do very well with them.
Okay. I've heard about kidney or back pain from high doses of pancreatic enzymes. Is that, do you think, related to just the breakdown of cancer cells and toxins?
Yeah, I would call that a symptom from waste materials. And we do have people cycle on and off the pancreatic enzymes. In other words, they don't take them every day for a year, and they take a few days off periodically. So that helps deal with that type of symptom as well.
Okay, great. Do people build up Mitch also wanted to know if people build up a tolerance to the enzymes.
In other words, that I'm not sure what's meant by tolerance. That could mean, and I realize in this setting, it's not that easy to go back and ask for clarification. So I'll answer the different possibilities here. One possibility would be, do people get so they tolerate them better? In other words, they're having issues like the backaches that you just mentioned. Muscle aches, that kind of thing, and then it improves. And yes, that does happen. But in terms of their effect against abnormal cells or cancer cells, I don't think that there is a tolerance that develops on the part of the cancer cells. I don't believe that. So I hope that answered which version he meant.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I would go with kind of like any supplement or protocol or treatment that in some cases the cancer could kind of outgrow it.
Like find a way around it, so to speak.
Yeah.
I don't think so. And I also, just again, speaking as a medical doctor, I'd also have to say that a person should never assume that a symptom like back pain, especially debilitating back pain, is due to, toxic waste symptoms or et cetera. That there are times that it's important to go see a doctor and get checked out. So certainly severe back pain would be one of those issues.
Okay, great. And then his last question is, should the enzymes be taken all at once or spread out during the day?
We have people spread them out through the day.
Okay, great. How many times during the day approximately?
Yeah, we're getting too prescriptive, which I can do.
Okay. All right. And then someone else had a question. I read on your website that, or, we just read that you treat conditions other than cancer. So can you give examples of other conditions that you work with people with?
Yeah, sure. We've seen people with various autoimmune disorders. Like I'm seeing now a patient with lupus that Dr. Gonzalez had started treating many, many years ago, and she was really quite sick with potential kidney problems and just a bad case of lupus. And she's been on the program for many, many years now, and she was recently seen by a rheumatologist who doesn't believe she ever had lupus. And I can assure you that she was very carefully diagnosed. And in fact, her mother had died of lupus and her father was a physician. So they had plenty of medical knowledge of their own, let alone the physicians that diagnosed her condition way back when. So lupus would be one example. Had patients with other types of autoimmune disorders, chronic fatigue, and that's another type of problem that we've seen a fair amount of over the years.
Wow. And that's what you had as well, as you'd shared in our last interview, and you did the therapy and you got better.
Yes, I myself developed a chronic fatigue type of syndrome when I was in medical school. And by the time I finished my internship, I was really barely functional. I made it through my internship, and so did all my patients, fortunately. But I wound up taking a couple of years out and going on this protocol and getting better. I had worked in a biochemistry laboratory and been very careless with laboratory chemicals during the period when I was putting this protocol into practice and presumably repairing and rebuilding. I actually had periods where some of the chemicals that I used, which smelled very strong, beta mercaptoethanol is the name of it, but it smells kind of like rotten eggs or possibly maybe a little like a skunk. People could smell it on my breath. I could smell it. And then eventually I got better, and I've really been fine ever since, as long as I follow my own protocol, which I do.
Wow, that's incredible. And so, I mean, your regimen is all about fixing or rebalancing the autonomic nervous system. So is that, do you find that that is a reason that people develop autoimmune diseases? Or I'm just curious how it, helps to fix those issues.
Right. Well, we do find that many of the people with the autoimmune disorders do have the overactive parasympathetic system, the system that's in charge of the rest and digest functions, but also in charge of the immune system. So our practical experience is that many, although not all, of patients with autoimmune disorders do need quite a bit of animal protein in their diet. But it's not 100%. That's a little not quite as clear cut.
That's interesting. I'm thinking about, how you'd mentioned lupus, and I have a relative who has an autoimmune disease that's nearly completely destroyed her kidneys, and she's waiting for a transplant now. And I had, actually suggested enzymes, but it hadn't really, become part of her protocol yet. So I will pass that information along. So that's really great. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So who else has a question? Feel free.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes. What is your name?
Sungwon Kang. You can call me Kim. It's my English name. Hi,
Sungwon
Linda.
Kang. Nice to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for inviting. I'm from South Korea. I diagnosed the breast cancer 3 years ago. It says stage 0 to going to the 1. My mom died from the breast cancer, and I have trauma having a surgery on it. And some of the doctor said I need to do the surgery, but I got a couple of suggestions. Then some doctors said I don't have to do it. And last year I sent you a confirmation, the letter, and Dr. Isaac replied to me to come back after surgery.
Right.
So you don't accept the patient that who doesn't do the surgery though?
Yeah, the thing is that from my point of view, surgery for early stage breast cancer can be completely curative. In many cases it is. And the protocol that I use is not easy to follow, and not everybody does follow it. Just because they come in my office doesn't mean they actually follow through. And also, with anything, no protocol is going to work for absolutely everybody. And so everything considered, I really think that it would be really unethical, and that's the word I always put in the letters that I assume you got, that it would be unethical for me to encourage you to do something when that out of the mainstream, when there's a mainstream option that could completely get rid of your disease. And I can tell you that I've met, over the course of my medical training, back when I did my internal medicine thing, that I've met many women that had early stage breast cancer that got surgery and they were fine. So that's why I tell people what I told you.
Okay. So in order to me to have the pancreas enzyme therapy, then I should do the surgery and reapply to you then.
I'd be more than happy to look at your material again after you got the surgery, but again, if I take on somebody that is, in my opinion, making a very unwise decision, I'm saying that I'm okay with that decision, and I'm not okay with that decision. I think you should get the surgery.
Okay, gotcha.
No, nobody's going to drag you off against your will. You're the one that makes the final decision, but that's my opinion.
Got it.
Thank you for the question, Seung-Won Kang.
How long is the waiting list to see you though? How long is the waiting to see you?
There's not a significant waiting list. If somebody needs to get in soon, I can get them in soon. That's not an issue.
Okay, great. Gotcha. And for like a breast cancer patient like me, do you know approximately how much it's gonna cost to buy the pills in American dollars though? Yeah,
that's all broken out on my website, all the information about the costs. We have a rough estimate of what it will be. So I'd suggest you just take a look there.
Okay.
If you go to the section that says new patients, in the first paragraph, it's got a link that has all of that spelled out for you.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Sure.
That's about it for me.
Okay, thanks for coming and asking your questions.
Thanks.
My question was similar to Stephanie's, and because so I had melanoma, as you know, and I followed the Gerson therapy, and I did have success on that. The shrinkage that I had initially was before I started the therapy, and then I continued with it, and I continued to have regression until there was no evidence of disease. And I forget what you said about the different nationalities and how that can skew results of studies because people have different nationalities. And I forgot to get all the background on myself. But I'm a quarter Irish, and I don't know where that falls into the the historical diets of the Irish, if you can recall that.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, what you're referring to, I believe, is some of what I spoke about in the interview about why there's so much conflicting information about what diet is best for people. In other words, you'll have some investigators saying that everybody should eat a vegan diet, and you'll have other investigators saying that everybody should eat a paleo diet, or
Yeah.
all sorts of variations in between. And that in our model, it would suggest, I mean, first of all, I think that most people are reasonably balanced. And by balanced, I mean people that can eat a variety of different types of food that function well on it. But there are some people that are extremes, more one way or the other. So there are some folks, their genetic background is one where there was a lot of fruits and vegetables, but it would be difficult to get much animal protein. Well, those people would be, in effect, selected to work well on that, and that would be the overactive sympathetic system. But the other extreme would be folks in the far north, for example, where they're growing grains. It really isn't much of a possibility if you get far enough into the Arctic Circle. So they're eating a diet that has a lot of whale blubber in effect, so they're eating a very high fat diet. And so people with that sort of genetic background would typically have the overactive parasympathetic system. And one of the examples I give of that is a patient who was a patient of Dr. Gonzalez, and now she's mine. But she, according to Dr. Gonzalez's evaluation, needed a lot of meat in her diet. And in fact, she's somebody that if she doesn't eat it 2 and sometimes 3 times a day, she just doesn't feel well. She does much, much better with a lot of meat in her diet. Well, she got one of those genetic tests looking at her ancestry, and it turned out that more than 70% of her background was actually from people that are north of the Arctic Circle. And the few exceptions to that apparently were from very high mountainous areas of Southern Europe. I think she said the Pyrenees. So the net result is that she was dealing with a genetic heritage that was highly carnivorous, and that's what works for her.
Wow, that's very interesting. That's great to hear, because my brother had a 23andMe test done, and theoretically we should have the same results because we have the same parents. But that's very interesting. And I lost my follow-up question.
Yeah, well, it's really hard to know, how much help those genetic tests are for most people, because most people are actually fairly balanced. And what can wind up happening is that various stresses of life push our metabolism in one direction or the other, and also dietary choices. So, for instance, if you take a balanced person and put them on a vegan diet, they're the ones that contact my office saying, I've been eating this wonderful diet for all these years, and now I have chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And from our point of view, that's predictable.
Wow, that's very interesting. Well, thank you.
I have a question, Bailey.
Okay, go ahead, Stephanie.
Hi again. I was just wondering if chiropractic has a place then in the protocol, as it can help to adjust the nervous system.
Well, I think there are certainly some patients that really need that. And so, it would depend. In other words, it's not something that I would recommend for absolutely everybody, but if somebody's having symptoms that would suggest that chiropractic adjustment would help, then sure, absolutely, it could help adjust the autonomic system.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I remember my question now. It was about enzymes. And I know you said in our interview that if you are not committed to following the protocol, don't try it. And if you don't follow the diet, then that could confuse your results. And then you don't know, if it's not working, it could be due to the diet and not the protocol itself. you know, and this is a tricky or difficult question, or maybe not, but are you aware of anyone who has not followed the protocol completely, like with the diet, and done, you know, the enzymes and maybe the supplements and the detox and still had success?
Gosh, I really don't know how to answer that question. Most of, you know, we try hard to be sure that patients that come in are willing to follow all of it. And also, most patients are actually, in other words, the diet that we give them is not something that typically they don't want to eat. You know, I guess the exception, of course, is sugar, which everybody seems to love and nobody should eat. But other than that, it's a rare thing that, for instance, if I tell somebody that they're supposed to eat meat, if they've been eating a vegan diet and I tell them they should eat a steak, they usually look at me like the heaven opened up and a steak fell down in front of them. And they say, what about a baked potato with butter on it? And like, yeah, sure, as long as it's organic, and they get even happier. Whereas somebody of the opposite metabolic persuasion that shouldn't be eating that wouldn't want to eat that. And so most of the patients are really pretty happy with what's served up. As far as, you know, have we had patients that only did part of it that did well? I can't think of anybody off the top of my head, but that's not something that I encourage in my patient group. So that's a tough one to answer.
Okay, no problem.
Although actually, I mean, just something that just popped in my head. I don't know if how many of you all saw the Radical Remission docu-series that ran quite recently. But in the episode, I was in one of the episodes, so you know, I actually watched the whole thing because it addressed a lot of issues about the emotional and spiritual aspects of healing that I thought were quite valuable. But in the episode after mine, and I really don't remember what the healing factor in that one was, but there was a woman who was talking about how she had addressed the way she approached life, and as I recall, it was a lot about the way she looked at the world. But then right at the end of what she said, oh, and I started taking pancreatic enzymes and the tumor went away, which I suppose that she might be an example of somebody that was only doing the enzymes, but I don't know. For all I know, she was doing coffee enemas and following a diet I would have approved of. I have no idea.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead. Is that all right? Thank you.
Celeste. I have been on a Square One. I'm sure you probably have heard of that with Chris' work. I've been doing that for about 8 months, which is pretty vegan. I also watched Dr. Greger and about hers autoimmune therapy, and it's even more restrictive. And I wonder if you had an opinion, Dr. Isaacs, about Dr. Greger's work. I have 2 autoimmune, both celiac and Sjogren's, and I had lymphoma and did chemo and am now in remission. Okay. That's my background.
All right. Well, I mean, first of all, you know, I certainly would say that if you're doing well with what you're doing, I'm not going to argue with it. You know, you have to use your own judgment with all of these things. The things that a vegan diet can potentially do, one would be freeing up the body's own pancreatic enzymes to do what they do, because a vegan diet isn't going to need a whole lot of pancreatic enzymes to digest the meal. So that's one consideration. Another would be that vegan diets can be quite detoxifying. And, you know, one of the things that I talk about sometimes is that, you know, if somebody's coming from eating what you might call a standard American diet, you know, with a lot of highly processed food and junk food in general, unhealthy food, just about anything that's cleaner is going to make people feel better for a while. But it's the long haul that can be the problem. So the autoimmune disorders, sometimes just by overall detoxification, getting rid of waste in effect, people can feel a whole lot better. But the aspect of that I use is really more the coffee enemas. That's what I use for detoxification. And I find, if you look at traditional peoples, you're not going to find any vegans out there. That's really a modern invention, so to speak. I don't know if you're familiar with Weston A. Price, but when he traveled around the world looking at the diets of various healthy indigenous people, there weren't any vegans out there. So that's my 2 cents on what might be going on with that.
Thank you so much.
Looks like we're getting to the end here.
Well, I enjoyed spending time with you all, and certainly the best for all of you in terms of your healing journey or that of your families going forward.
Thank you so much. Did someone unmute themselves to ask a question?
Oh, that was me.
Okay, yeah.
Again.
Yes, go ahead, Stephanie.
I remember from the last video you mentioned that the coffee enemas were done back to back, so 2 in the morning and then 2 in the evening, and which is different to the Gerson therapy. They spread them out, and I was just wondering, is there a reason as to why that is done?
It's just what we found works. I mean, look, I could make something up, but it's fundamentally rather empiric. The enzymes create ways, but they also help break them down. So the higher dose of pancreatic enzymes may actually help somewhat with detoxification as well. But I'd say, it may also just be, they do what they do because they don't want to change it, because they like the results they've gotten.
Great. Okay. If there are no other questions, that's it for tonight. Thank you, Dr. Isaac, so much for being here tonight. And actually, I did have one last question. At the end of our interview last time, you had said that you were looking for someone who could, kind of go through the therapy themselves as an MD if they were looking to shadow you and learn from you. Have you had anyone ask you to do that yet?
No, not yet, but I'm sure the right person will come along at the right time. That's part of why I moved to Austin, though, is because it's just so prohibitively expensive, everything in New York City, to have enough space to have another doctor there. So coming here just seemed like the right thing to do. And of course, in the wake of this whole COVID-19 thing, I'm really quite relieved that I'm not in New York, because I can't imagine trying to function there right at the moment. Although I hope that will change soon.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I think we did have someone just come on who wanted to ask you, I think they wanted to ask you a question. Technology is fun when it works right.
Well, I thought I'll just say, I've got this virtual background behind me with my website, so feel free to go and check that out. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. And is there anything new that we can pray about for you at all in any way?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, we'll keep praying for that doctor to come and learn from you and pass on your work.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. God bless you. Have a great night.
Okay, good night.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.